What kind of man brings his mistress to his pregnant wife's funeral and smiles? Just imagine St. Catherine's Chapel filled with 300 people dressed in black, surrounding an elegant white casket draped in roses, holding Elena Hale, a beloved philanthropist who died at 8 months pregnant in a way that made absolutely no sense. The air was thick with the scent of white lilies and expensive perfume, mixed with something else. Disbelief. Then the massive oak doors at the back of the chapel swing open. How could you? Her husband walks in. You're a monster, Roman. Holding hands with a woman he'd been sleeping with for over a year. This is disgusting. Vanessa Reed's, his mistress, wearing a tight black dress that left nothing to the imagination, diamonds glittering at her throat. But here's the secret nobody in that church knew. I can't believe what I'm seeing. The woman in that coffin was no victim. She was a mastermind. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 10,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Everyone thought Elena Hale was just another wealthy socialite attending charity galas and planning fundraisers. In reality, she was the sole heiress to a $300 million pharmaceutical empire. And while her husband was plotting to inherit everything and disappear with his mistress, she was quietly keeping a record of every single lie, every betrayal, every cruel word he ever said. She had bank statements, recorded phone calls, screenshots of messages where he literally said he wished she would just die already. And she left something behind. Something she arranged to be delivered at her own funeral, designed to destroy everyone who ever thought she was weak or stupid or easy to manipulate. What you're about to hear is going to shock you. The twists in this story are so unexpected that even I couldn't believe them when I first learned the truth. Please stay with me because the final revelation, the moment when everything comes crashing down, is something nobody in that chapel could have predicted. Not the guests, not Roman, not even his mistress. And if you enjoy stories about justice, revenge, and people getting exactly what they deserve, make sure you subscribe because this channel is dedicated to bringing you the most satisfying real-life drama you'll ever hear. This is the story of Elena Hale and Kong Min Jae, and it's the story of how a dead woman got the perfect revenge with the help of the one man who truly loved her. This story will teach you a powerful lesson. Never underestimate a quiet woman who's been watching and planning. Never mistake her patience for weakness. And never ever believe that someone who seems powerless cannot become the most dangerous person in the room. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted, if you've ever been underestimated or dismissed, if you've ever wanted to see a cheater get exactly what's coming to them, this story is for you. The white casket was positioned at the front of St. Catherine's Chapel, an achingly beautiful and utterly tragic sight. It was surrounded by hundreds of white roses and orchids, their petals perfect and pure, illuminated by the soft golden glow of candles that made shadows dance across the polished marble floors. 300 guests sat in the antique wooden pews, all dressed in designer black, their faces carefully arranged into expressions of grief and shock. These were the elite of society, people who measured their worth in millions, who attended events like this more for appearance than genuine sorrow. The chapel itself was magnificent, with soaring ceilings, stained glass windows depicting biblical scenes in brilliant colors, and the kind of old-world elegance that money alone cannot buy. But underneath all that beauty was a feeling of complete and utter wrongness, like something fundamental had been violated. And at the heart of it all, inside the gorgeous casket that cost more than most people earn in 5 years, was Elena Hale. 32 years old, 8 months pregnant, a woman who should have been preparing for the happiest moment of her life. Instead, she was supposedly lying dead, taken too soon by what the doctors vaguely called complications. A loving wife, they said. A generous philanthropist. A mother-to-be who would never meet her daughter. And now she was gone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you who I am and why I know this story better than anyone else alive. My name is Kong Min Jae, and the woman in that coffin, the woman everyone believed was dead, was the only person who ever saw me as more than the dangerous reputation that preceded me. To the world, I'm a ghost. A shadow. The head of one of the most powerful Korean organized crime families operating in the United States. People whisper my name in fear, cross the street when they see me coming, and would never, ever imagine that someone like Elena Hale, with her pristine reputation and old money background, would even know someone like me. But she saved my life 7 years ago when I was bleeding out in an alley, left for dead by a rival gang. She found me, didn't call the police, didn't run away screaming. She got me to safety, paid for a private doctor, and asked for nothing in return. Nothing. For weeks she visited me while I recovered, brought me books, talked to me like I was a human being instead of a monster. And I fell in love with her then, completely and hopelessly, though I never told her. She was engaged to Roman at the time, seemed happy, seemed like she'd found her fairy tale. So I stepped back into the shadows where I belonged and watched from a distance as she married him, always ready if she ever needed me. She needed me 3 months ago when she called me in the middle of the night, her voice shaking, and told me she discovered something that would destroy her. That's when everything changed. That's when we started planning the impossible. And that's why I was standing in the back of that chapel, watching Roman Hale parade his mistress down the aisle of his wife's funeral, knowing that in exactly 17 minutes, I was going to end his entire world. The baby survived, by the way. Elena's daughter Hope was delivered by emergency C-section and was fighting for her life in the NICU at Mercy General, for pounds of pure determination. She had no idea that her mother had died, or so everyone believed. She had no idea that her father had already contacted lawyers about accessing her trust fund, or that he'd been planning for months how to spend the inheritance. But here's what really happened, the truth that was about to explode through that chapel like a bomb. Elena hadn't died from complications. She was perfectly healthy. Her pregnancy had been textbook normal, glowing and beautiful and full of life. I knew because I'd been there for every doctor's appointment in secret, making sure she and the baby were safe, watching as Roman grew more distant and cruel with each passing week. The doctors who pronounced her dead paid off. The medical records showing organ failure completely falsified. The closed casket funeral necessary because there was nobody actually in that coffin. Elena Hale was alive. And she was watching everything unfold from a secure location 5 miles away, her hand in mine as we observed the live feed from hidden cameras we planted throughout the chapel. She was about to get her revenge in the most spectacular way possible, and I was honored to help her do it. Because when you love someone, truly love them, you don't just protect them from danger. Sometimes you help them become the danger. But nobody in that chapel knew any of this yet. They were all watching Roman and Vanessa, gasps rippling through the crowd, whispered conversations spreading like wildfire. The priest had stopped speaking, his face pale with shock and disapproval. Elena's family members were standing up, anger flashing in their eyes. And Roman, that pathetic excuse for a man, just kept walking down the aisle with that smug smile on his face, completely unaware that his entire life was about to be destroyed in front of everyone he'd ever wanted to impress. The scene was set. The players were in position. And I was about to make my entrance, carrying with me the evidence that would expose every single lie, every betrayal, every moment of cruelty that Roman Hale had inflicted on the woman I loved. What happened next would become legendary in certain circles, whispered about for years as the greatest act of revenge anyone had ever witnessed. But to understand how we got here, to truly appreciate the beautiful destruction that was about to unfold, you need to know the whole story. You need to understand who Elena really was, what Roman did to her, and how a pharmaceutical heiress and a mafia boss formed the most unlikely alliance in history. You need to hear about the nights we spent planning every detail, the moment our friendship turned into something more, and the impossible choice Elena made when she realized the only way to expose the truth was to fake her own death. So let me take you back to the beginning, to the night 3 months ago when Elena called me and said the 4 words that changed everything. The 4 words that set this entire plan in motion and led us to this moment, standing on the edge of the most satisfying revenge either of us had ever imagined. I know everything, she'd said, her voice breaking. And I need your help. To understand what happened at that funeral, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to when Elena Hale thought she'd found her fairy tale. Back before she knew that the man she married was nothing more than a con artist in an expensive suit. Back to the moment when her perfect life started crumbling and she realized she'd been living a lie. Everyone believed Roman and Elena had a fairy tale romance, the kind of love story that magazines wrote about and society pages celebrated with glossy photographs. She was Elena Whitmore before the marriage, the the sole heiress to the Whitmore-Hale pharmaceutical empire worth over $300 million. Her family's company had developed some of the most important medications of the last century, treatments that saved lives and generated wealth beyond most people's comprehension. Roman Hale seemed devoted from the moment he entered her life at a charity gala 5 years ago. He was always by her side at fundraising events, always holding her hand at family gatherings, always playing the role of the perfect supportive husband. But behind the closed doors of their mansion in the elite Riverside Heights neighborhood, he never loved her. Not once. Not ever. Roman married Elena because she was his golden ticket to a life of unlimited wealth and luxury. He'd been a mid-level financial analyst before they met, making decent money but nothing compared to the world Elena inhabited. He saw her at that gala, did his research, and realized she was about to inherit everything when her aging father stepped down from the company. So he played the part perfectly. He was charming, attentive, romantic in all the ways that mattered to someone who'd grown up lonely despite her wealth. He studied her like a subject, learned what she wanted to hear, became exactly what she needed. For the first 2 years of their marriage, Roman maintained the facade beautifully. But when Elena became pregnant 8 months ago, everything changed. His mask began slipping in small ways at first. He grew colder, more distant, finding excuses to work late or travel for business. He stopped asking about her day, stopped touching her the way he used to, stopped pretending to care about the baby growing inside her. Then the comments started, casual and cruel, dropped into conversations like bombs. Things would be so much simpler if it was just the two of us, he'd say. Or sometimes, I never really wanted kids, you know. The worst was when he looked at her growing belly and said, I just hope this doesn't change everything between us, with a tone that made it clear he hoped it would end everything instead. Elena noticed all of it, felt the shift like ice forming in her veins, but she tried to convince herself it was just stress or fear of becoming a father. She made excuses for him because the alternative, that she'd married a man who didn't love her, was too painful to accept. But deep down, in the place where we store truths we're not ready to face, she knew something was terribly wrong. She just didn't know how wrong until the rumors started spreading through their social circle like poison in the water. And those rumors were about to force Elena to confront a reality more horrifying than she could have imagined. Vanessa Reeds was a predator who knew exactly what she was doing. She was 28 years old, stunningly beautiful in the way that turns heads and stops conversations, and she worked as a senior marketing director at a firm that did business with several companies in Elena's social circle. She'd been sleeping with Roman for 14 months, ever since they met at a business conference in Miami. Roman had been careless about hiding the affair, sloppy in the way that arrogant men often are when they believe they're untouchable. But Vanessa was different. She was strategic, patient, calculating. She didn't just want to be Roman's mistress. She wanted to be his wife, and that meant Elena needed to be completely out of the picture. So Vanessa began deliberately spreading vicious rumors through the elite social circles where reputation meant everything. She whispered to the right people at the right parties, always careful to seem concerned rather than malicious. She'd say things like, I'm so worried about Roman, he seems so stressed about Elena's pregnancy, as if she was a caring friend rather than the woman destroying his marriage. She'd mention casually that Roman had confided in her about feeling trapped, about how different Elena had become since getting pregnant, about how he sometimes wondered what his life would be like if he were free. The rumors grew darker and more specific. She told people that Roman was consulting with lawyers about inheritance laws. She implied that he was counting down the days until Elena's death during childbirth would solve all his problems and leave him free to move on with someone else, someone younger and more fun and less complicated. The whispers spread like wildfire through country clubs and charity luncheons, through golf courses and private dining rooms. People love scandal, especially when it involves the wealthy and powerful, and this story had everything. A pregnant heiress, a cheating husband, a beautiful mistress, and the dark suggestion that someone might be waiting for a convenient tragedy. Most people didn't truly believe Roman would hurt Elena, but they loved talking about the possibility, loved the drama of it all. The rumors reached Elena's ears at a spring charity luncheon benefiting children's literacy programs. She was 6 months pregnant, glowing in a soft blue maternity dress, when she overheard 2 women talking in the bathroom. They didn't know she was in the stall, didn't realize she could hear every cruel word. That poor Elena Hale, one of them said. Everyone knows Roman's counting down the days until she's gone so he can finally be with that Vanessa woman and get his hands on the Whitmore fortune. It's absolutely tragic. The other woman laughed, actually laughed, and said, well, if she's stupid enough not to see what's happening, maybe she deserves whatever happens. Elena sat in that bathroom stall with her hands pressed against her pregnant belly, feeling her daughter kick beneath her palms, and something fundamental broke inside her. Not her spirit, though. Her illusions shattered, yes, but something harder and sharper took their place. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She sat there in absolute silence, feeling rage and clarity wash through her in equal measure, and made a decision that would change everything. She didn't confront Roman when she got home that evening. She didn't throw plates or demand explanations or break down in tears. Instead, she went up to her bedroom, closed the door, and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found a name she hadn't called in almost 2 years, a name that represented a life completely separate from her world of charity galas and pharmaceutical board meetings. A name that belonged to the most dangerous man she'd ever met and the only person she trusted completely. Kong Min Jae, the screen read. She stared at it for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the call button, knowing that once she made this call, there would be no going back. Everything would change. The Elena Whitmore Hale that everyone knew, the sweet philanthropist who always saw the best in people, would have to become someone else. Someone harder. Someone willing to do whatever it took to protect herself and her daughter. She pressed call. I answered on the second ring, my voice cautious because Elena never called unless something was seriously wrong. The moment I heard her voice, tight with controlled emotion, I knew this wasn't a social call. We need to meet, she said quietly. Tonight. Somewhere private. I know what Roman's planning, and I need your help with something that might sound completely insane. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask questions. I just said, I'll send you an address. Come alone. Whatever you need, it's yours. That night, Elena drove to a private penthouse in the financial district that served as one of my legitimate business offices, though everyone who mattered knew it was where I conducted my real work. She walked into my world wearing designer maternity clothes and carrying a tablet full of evidence that would make your blood run cold. And for the next 4 hours, we sat across from each other and planned something that should have been impossible. We planned her death. But more importantly, we planned Roman's destruction. And somewhere during those hours of strategy and revelation, something shifted between us, something that had been waiting 7 years to finally surface. But before I tell you about that night and what we decided, you need to understand exactly what Elena discovered about Roman. You need to see the evidence that made faking her death seem like the only option. Because what she found went far beyond simple infidelity. It was so much worse than that. And if you think you know where this story is going, trust me, you have no idea what's coming next. Elena had been monitoring Roman's phone and emails for 3 months before she called me. Ever since the night she'd woken up at 2 in the morning and found him in his office, quickly closing his laptop when she appeared in the doorway. The way he'd looked at her, startled and guilty, had planted a seed of suspicion that grew roots and spread. She was brilliant, remember, not just wealthy but genuinely intelligent with a master's degree in business administration and a mind that understood systems and patterns. She'd learned years ago how to access shared devices, how to use cloud backups, how to piece together digital footprints. It was easier than most people think when you share bank accounts and family plans and have access to all the passwords. What she discovered over those 3 months made her blood run cold and her hands shake with fury every time she looked at the man she'd married. Roman had contacted 3 different inheritance lawyers, asking detailed questions about spousal death benefits and estate law. The emails were careful, hypothetical, phrased as if he was just curious about planning for the future. But the pattern was clear. He wanted to know exactly what would happen if Elena died while pregnant, whether the baby would inherit, how he could gain control of trust funds and company shares, what the legal process looked like. He researched laws in states with more favorable inheritance rules. He asked about moving assets offshore. He even inquired about hiring private investigators to document any potential claims against the estate, as if he was already preparing for challenges to his inheritance. But it got worse. So much worse. Roman had researched Costa Rica and Panama properties, looking at luxury homes in areas with limited extradition agreements. He'd been learning Spanish using a language app on his phone. He'd created a separate email account under a false name and used it to research getting fake identity documents. He'd started moving money, small amounts at first, transferring funds from their joint accounts into offshore accounts Elena didn't know existed. Over 14 months, he'd siphoned away nearly $2 million, money he was hiding in preparation for something. The most damning evidence was in his text messages with Vanessa. They'd been careless, probably because Roman never imagined Elena would check, probably because he thought she was too trusting and naive to suspect anything. The messages were horrifying in their casual cruelty. "I can't wait until this is over and we can finally be together for real," Vanessa had written. Roman's response made Elena's stomach turn. "Me too, baby. I just need to be patient a little longer." The pregnancy complicates things, but honestly, given the statistics on maternal mortality, especially with first pregnancies, nature might solve our problems for us. If not, we'll figure something else out. I'm not spending the rest of my life trapped in this marriage. There were dozens of messages like that, each one worse than the last. Vanessa asking when they could go public with their relationship. Roman saying, "After she's gone. Just be patient." Vanessa complaining about having to be secret. Roman reassuring her that soon they'd have more money than they could spend and could go anywhere in the world together. The worst message, the one that made Elena physically ill when she read it, was from 6 weeks ago. Roman had texted Vanessa after a doctor's appointment, saying, "Doctor says everything is progressing normally with the pregnancy. Honestly, I was hoping for complications. Would make everything so much simpler. I wish she would just die already so we can be together and I can access the trust." Elena sat in her car in the parking lot of a grocery store when she found that message, reading it 3 times to make sure she understood correctly, and something inside her transformed completely. The woman who'd always believed in seeing the best in people, who'd built her life around helping others and giving second chances, died in that moment. What replaced her was someone harder, someone capable of things she'd never imagined. She drove straight to a secure location and transferred every piece of evidence to an encrypted drive. Screenshots of messages, bank records, emails to lawyers, research history from his computer. She documented everything, organized it meticulously, created a timeline that showed clear premeditation and intent. Then she called me, because she knew that what she was planning would require resources and connections that existed far outside her normal world. That night in my penthouse office, Elena sat across from me with her hands trembling but her eyes completely dry and showed me everything. I read the messages, reviewed the financial records, saw the lawyer consultations and the research into inheritance law. With each piece of evidence, my anger grew hotter and more focused. I'd known Roman was unworthy of her from the day they got married, had watched from a distance as he played his role, but I'd never imagined he was actively hoping for her death. I wanted to kill him right there. I mean that literally. I knew a dozen ways to make it look like an accident, knew people who could make someone disappear without a trace. But Elena stopped me with a hand on my arm and a look that was pure steel. "No," she said quietly. "I don't want him dead. I want him destroyed. I want everyone who ever respected him to know exactly what he is. I want his reputation ruined, his plans exposed, his future demolished. Death would be too quick, too easy. I want him to live with the consequences of what he tried to do." That's when we started planning the impossible. And that's when I realized that the quiet, gentle woman I'd loved from a distance for 7 years had always possessed a core of absolute titanium. She'd just never had a reason to reveal it until someone threatened everything she loved, including the daughter she. In my penthouse office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, Elena and I spent the next 6 weeks planning something that should have been completely impossible. We met 3 or 4 times a week, always late at night after Roman thought Elena was asleep, always in locations that couldn't be traced back to either of us. She'd park her car several blocks away and take rideshare services that couldn't be connected to her usual patterns. I'd make sure we weren't followed, that no surveillance could compromise what we were building. And slowly, carefully, we assembled the pieces of an elaborate deception that would require perfect timing, absolute secrecy, and resources that only someone in my position could provide. The core of the plan was audacious in its simplicity. Elena would fake her own death, making it look like she died from pregnancy complications, and we'd stage a funeral where Roman would inevitably reveal his true nature. Then, at the perfect moment, we'd expose everything. His affair, his financial manipulation, his hopes for her death, all of it laid bare in front of everyone who mattered. The beauty of the plan was that Roman would destroy himself. We'd simply create the stage and let him perform. But making someone appear convincingly dead, especially someone as prominent as Elena Hale, required careful orchestration of dozens of moving parts. First, we needed a doctor we could trust completely. I had connections to Dr. Sarah Chun, a brilliant physician who ran a private clinic and owed me several significant favors after I'd helped her brother avoid serious legal trouble years ago. She was ethical in most ways but pragmatic enough to understand that sometimes the system fails people who deserve justice. When I explained what Elena was facing and what we needed, Dr. Chen agreed to help. She created a complete set of falsified medical records showing that Elena had developed a rare and aggressive infection, one that progressed rapidly despite treatment. The records were perfect, indistinguishable from legitimate hospital documentation, because they were created in the actual hospital system with Dr. Chen's access codes. Next, we needed to orchestrate the actual fake death. Elena would be admitted to Mercy General Hospital, a facility where Dr. Chun had admitting privileges, complaining of severe symptoms. Dr. Chun would examine her, admit her, and over the course of 12 hours, her condition would appear to deteriorate rapidly despite aggressive treatment. During this time, Elena's baby would be delivered via emergency C-section, a real procedure because Hope was actually ready to be born early. The baby would survive and be placed in the NICU for monitoring, which was standard procedure for any baby born even slightly premature. Then, while the baby was safe, Elena would be declared dead. The death itself would be orchestrated with the help of a night shift nurse I'd worked with before on sensitive matters, someone who understood that sometimes official records don't tell the whole truth. Elena would be moved to a private room, officially declared deceased, and then quietly transferred out of the hospital through a service entrance to a private medical facility I controlled. Her body would never actually be in the morgue. Instead, the coffin at her funeral would be empty, sealed and locked, explained away as necessary because of the infection that supposedly killed her. It was elaborate, risky, and required perfect coordination. But it would work because people see what they expect to see, and no one would question the death of a pregnant woman from medical complications when a respected doctor declared it so. During these planning sessions that stretched late into the night, something unexpected began happening between Elena and me. The conversations shifted from purely strategic to personal. We'd finished discussing the logistics of falsifying death certificates and then find ourselves talking about our lives, our regrets, our dreams for the future. Elena told me about the loneliness of her marriage, how she'd felt like a prop in Roman's performance rather than a real person he valued. I told her about the isolation of my life, how being feared meant being fundamentally alone, how I'd built walls around myself that no one had ever tried to scale. One night, about 3 weeks into our planning, we'd been reviewing the timeline for the funeral when Elena suddenly stopped mid-sentence and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Why did you really agree to help me with this?" she asked quietly. "I know you said you owed me for saving your life, but this goes far beyond repaying a debt. You're risking everything. Why?" I should have deflected or made a joke or kept the walls firmly in place. But sitting there in the dim light of my office, looking at this woman who'd shown me kindness when I was at my most vulnerable, who'd never looked at me with fear or judgment, who trusted me with her life and her daughter's future, the truth just came out. "Because I've been in love with you since the day you found me bleeding in that alley 7 years ago," I said quietly. "Because watching Roman treat you like something he owned instead of someone he cherished has been torture. Because you deserve so much better than what he gave you, and I would do absolutely anything to protect you and give you a chance at the life you should have had. I didn't tell you before because you seemed happy with him, and I respected that. But now, helping you destroy the man who tried to destroy you, that's not about repaying a debt. It's about making sure the woman I love gets the justice she deserves." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Elena sat completely still, her eyes wide, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. Then, slowly, she smiled. It wasn't a big dramatic smile, Just a small genuine expression of something that looked like relief mixed with wonder. "I think I've known for a while," she said softly. "The way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. The way you remember every small detail I mention. The way you're so careful with me, like I'm something precious. And here's the thing, Kong. I'm starting to feel something too. I don't know if it's love yet or if I'm just desperate for someone who actually cares about me, but when I'm with you, I feel safe in a way I never felt with Roman. I feel seen. And that matters more than I can explain." We didn't kiss that night. It felt too soon, too complicated with everything else happening. But we held hands across the table while we continued planning, and something fundamental shifted between us. We weren't just allies anymore. We were becoming something more, something neither of us had expected, but both of us desperately needed. The planning continued over the following weeks, growing more detailed and more complex. We mapped out every moment of the funeral, planned the seating arrangements to ensure maximum impact when the truth was revealed, coordinated with Dr. Chen and the hospital staff about timing. I arranged for surveillance cameras to be installed in the chapel, hidden in the flower arrangements and behind decorative elements, so Elena could watch everything unfold from a safe location. We wrote the script for what I would say when I walked into that chapel, how I'd expose Roman piece by piece, building to the revelation that Elena was alive. And through it all, Elena and I grew closer. We shared late dinners after planning sessions. We talked about what would happen after the funeral, after the divorce, after everything settled. We imagined futures that seemed impossible just weeks before. One night, about a week before the planned fake death, we were reviewing final details when Elena suddenly started crying, the stress and emotion of everything finally overwhelming her careful control. I moved around the table and pulled her into my arms, holding her carefully because of her pregnancy, and she buried her face against my chest and sobbed. "I'm so scared," she whispered. "Not of the plan or Roman finding out. I'm scared that I'll never be able to trust anyone again. I'm scared that what he did broke something in me that can't be fixed." I held her tighter and said something I'd been thinking for weeks. "You're not broken, Elena. You're betrayed, and that's completely different. Broken things can't fight back. But you're fighting back in the most brilliant way imaginable. You're taking control of your own story. That's not weakness. That's incredible strength. And when this is over, you're going to rebuild your life into something beautiful because you're fundamentally good and strong and deserving of everything you want." She pulled back slightly and looked up at me, her eyes red from crying but also full of something that made my heart race. Then she kissed me. It was gentle and tentative at first, a question more than a statement. I kissed her back, careful and protective, trying to pour 7 years of unspoken love into that moment without overwhelming her. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard, and Elena had the first genuinely happy smile I'd seen on her face in months. "Whatever happens after all this is over," she said softly, "I want you to know that you've given me something I didn't think I'd ever have again. Hope. Not just for revenge or justice, but hope that maybe I can have the life I always wanted with someone who actually loves me for who I am, not what I can give them." The plan was set. The pieces were in position. And Roman Hale had no idea that his entire world was about to come crashing down around him in the most public, most humiliating way possible. The countdown to the funeral had begun, and with it, the countdown to the most satisfying revenge I've ever been part of orchestrating. The night before Elena's carefully orchestrated fake funeral, Roman Hale did something so spectacularly stupid and arrogant that even I, someone who'd seen the worst of human nature in my line of work, was genuinely shocked by his audacity. He threw a private celebration party at the Ritz-Carlton, complete with champagne and room service, to toast his supposedly imminent freedom and wealth. And thanks to the surveillance team I'd positioned in the room directly across the hall, we captured every single moment of it in crystal-clear high-definition video. Let me paint you a picture of what kind of man celebrates the night before his pregnant wife's funeral. Roman had booked the executive suite under a fake name, paying cash to avoid any paper trail connecting him to the celebration. Vanessa arrived first, wearing a skin-tight red dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her hair and makeup done like she was attending a gala rather than meeting her married lover the night before his wife's funeral. She carried shopping bags from luxury stores, already spending money that Roman didn't technically have yet but seemed absolutely confident would soon be his. The surveillance footage showed them opening a bottle of Cristal champagne that cost $1,200, toasting to their future together with genuine joy on their faces. Not grief. Not even fake sorrow. Just pure, undisguised happiness that Elena was supposedly dead and they could finally be together openly. It was disgusting to watch, and I had to stop Elena from seeing the footage live because I knew it would destroy her to witness how little her husband cared about her death. Roman poured champagne and raised his glass. To freedom, he said, grinning like he'd won the lottery. To finally being done with the sad widow act and moving on with our real lives. $300 million, baby. We're set for life. We can go anywhere, do anything. No more pretending, no more hiding. Just you and me and more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. Vanessa laughed and clinked her glass against his. I've been thinking about what we should do first, she said, pulling out her phone and showing him pictures. I want to buy that penthouse in Monaco we looked at. And maybe a yacht. Something big enough to live on if we want to just sail around the world for a year or two. We deserve it after all this waiting. The conversation got worse from there. They talked about redecorating the mansion, getting rid of all of Elena's things and replacing them with Vanessa's taste. Roman joked about how he'd have to keep up appearances for a few months, play the grieving widower, but then they could quietly start being seen together in public. Vanessa talked about the engagement ring she wanted, showed him pictures of diamonds the size of grapes, and Roman promised he'd buy her whatever she wanted once the estate was settled. But the most damning part, the footage that made my blood boil with rage, was when they started talking about Hope, Elena's newborn daughter fighting for her life in the NICU. What are you going to do about the baby? Vanessa asked, taking a sip of champagne. I mean, I know she inherits half the estate or whatever, but you have control as her guardian, right? Roman shrugged, completely casual, like they were discussing what to order for dinner. Legally I'm her father, and I control her trust until she's 21. The lawyers said I have full discretion over how that money is managed and invested. So yeah, technically it's her money, but I'll be the one making all the decisions about it. And if some of those investment decisions happen to benefit us, well, who's going to question it? The kid won't even know the difference. Vanessa smiled and kissed him. You're so smart. What about custody though? I mean, are you actually going to raise her? Because I'm not really the mother type. No offense to your daughter or whatever. Roman laughed, actually laughed, and said something that made me want to break through the wall and end him right there. Honestly, I'm hoping Elena's parents will want to take her. They're devastated about losing Elena, and I can play the struggling single father card, say it's too painful to raise her alone without her mother. They'll probably jump at the chance to have custody, and then I'm free of the responsibility but still have control of her money. It's perfect. We get the wealth and the freedom without having to actually deal with a kid. They toasted to that plan and ordered room service, lobster and filet mignon, the most expensive items on the menu. They fed each other bites of food and laughed about how everything was working out even better than they'd hoped. Vanessa modeled diamond necklaces that Roman promised to buy her, trying them on and admiring herself in the mirror. He pulled out his laptop and showed her properties he'd been researching, vacation homes in places with beautiful beaches and limited extradition treaties, though he phrased it as just wanting privacy and tropical weather. Around midnight, Vanessa pulled out her phone and started taking selfies, pictures of her and Roman together in the luxury suite, kissing and smiling and celebrating. You can't post those yet, Roman warned. We have to be careful. Another few months and then we can go public, but not yet. People would talk if they knew we were together the night before the funeral. Not yet. People would talk if they knew we were together the night before the funeral. Vanessa pouted but agreed, though she kept the photos, probably planning to post them eventually as proof of their grand romance. They had no idea that every photo, every word, every toast was being recorded by the team positioned across the hall. We had 6 different camera angles and directional microphones that picked up every whisper. The evidence was absolutely damning, and it would play beautifully at the funeral when I exposed everything. Watching the surveillance footage from my office while Elena slept in the next room, preparing for the performance of her life the next day, I felt a cold rage settle into my bones. This man had married a good woman who'd loved him, gotten her pregnant, and then actively hoped she would die so he could steal her money and run away with his mistress. He was celebrating her supposed death like it was the best thing that ever happened to him. He was already planning how to exploit his own daughter's trust fund. He deserved everything that was about to happen to him and more. I saved the footage to multiple secure drives, made backup copies, and prepared the edited version that would be played at key moments during the funeral. Roman Hale had handed us the ammunition to destroy him, and he was so arrogant, so confident that he'd gotten away with everything, that he never considered the possibility that someone might be watching. The funeral was set for 2 in the afternoon the next day. In less than 14 hours, Roman would walk into St. Catherine's Chapel thinking he was attending his wife's funeral and beginning his new life of freedom and wealth. What he didn't know was that he was walking into a trap that would end everything he'd ever hoped for and expose him in front of everyone who mattered. Elena was alive and watching. I was ready to deliver the evidence. And Roman's premature celebration was about to become the biggest mistake of his pathetic life. The revenge we'd spent 6 weeks planning was about to unfold in the most spectacular way imaginable. Justice was coming, and it was going to be beautiful. The afternoon of the funeral arrived with perfect weather, which somehow made everything feel even more surreal. Brilliant sunshine streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Catherine's Chapel, casting patterns of colored light across the marble floors and the white casket that held absolutely nothing. 300 guests filled the pews, the elite of society dressed in their finest black, whispering among themselves about the tragedy of Elena's death and the strange rumors surrounding Roman's behavior. I was positioned 5 miles away in a secure penthouse apartment, sitting beside Elena as we watched multiple camera feeds showing every angle of the chapel. She wore comfortable clothes, her hand resting on her recovering belly, while her daughter Hope slept peacefully in a bassinet nearby, healthy and beautiful and completely unaware that she was about to be part of the most dramatic revelation of the decade. Elena's hand was in mine, squeezing tight as we watched the chapel fill with people who believed she was dead. The funeral started with traditional elements. The priest delivered opening remarks about life and loss and faith. Elena's parents sat in the front row, her mother sobbing into a handkerchief while her father stared at the casket with hollow eyes. They believed their daughter was dead, and watching their genuine grief was the hardest part of this entire plan. Elena had wanted to tell them the truth, but we'd agreed it was too risky. Their reactions needed to be authentic for the plan to work, and they'd understand once everything was revealed. At least, we hoped they would. Then, exactly as we'd anticipated, the chapel doors swung open and Roman made his entrance. The collective gasp from the assembled guests was audible even through our audio feeds. Roman walked down the center aisle with Vanessa Reeds on his arm, both of them making absolutely no effort to hide their relationship or appear appropriately somber. Vanessa wore a tight black dress with a neckline cut so low it bordered on obscene for a funeral, her hair styled in glamorous waves, diamond earrings glittering at her ears. Roman wore an expensive suit, but his expression was wrong, too relaxed, almost smiling at the corners of his mouth. They didn't look like they were attending a funeral. They looked like they were making a statement. People started whispering immediately, the sound rising like angry bees throughout the chapel. Elena's mother stood up, her face shocked and furious. "How dare you?" she shouted at Roman. "How dare you bring that woman to my daughter's funeral?" Roman held up his hands in a placating gesture that just made him look more arrogant. "I know this looks bad," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "But I'm not going to hide anymore. Elena would have wanted me to be happy, and Vanessa makes me happy. I'm grieving in my own way." The priest looked uncomfortable, clearly unsure whether to intervene or continue the service. Elena's father was being restrained by family members who were holding him back from physically attacking Roman. The whispers grew louder, people pulling out their phones to text friends about the scandal unfolding before them. It was chaos, exactly the kind of public spectacle that would make what came next even more devastating. That's when I made my entrance. I'd timed it perfectly, waiting until the chaos reached its peak before I walked through the chapel doors flanked by 6 of my men in dark suits. Our presence was immediately commanding in a way that silenced the crowd more effectively than any request for quiet. People recognized me, or at least recognized the type of men we were, and fear rippled through the gathering like a physical wave. The whispers stopped. Everyone turned to watch as I walked down the center aisle with slow, deliberate steps, my eyes locked on Roman's suddenly pale face. I was carrying a manila envelope and a tablet, and my expression was cold enough to freeze fire. I stopped directly in front of the casket, facing the assembled crowd while Roman and Vanessa stood off to the side. The priest started to speak, but I held up one hand and he fell silent, understanding that whatever was about to happen was bigger than traditional funeral protocols. "My name is Kong Min Jae," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent chapel. "I'm here on behalf of Elena Hale to deliver her final wishes and to share some information that I believe you all need to hear." When Elena realized what was happening in her marriage, when she discovered the truth about the man she trusted with her life and her future, she came to me for help. And what I'm about to share with you is going to change everything you thought you knew about Roman Hale and his mistress Vanessa Reeds. Roman's smug expression was finally starting to crack. Confusion and the first hints of fear flickered across his face. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "Who even are you? You have no right to be here." I smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "I have every right because Elena gave me these documents and asked me to make sure the truth came out. Let's start with the affair, shall we? For the past 14 months, Roman has been sleeping with Vanessa Reeds while his wife was pregnant with his child. But it gets so much worse than simple infidelity." I opened the tablet and projected images onto the white wall behind the altar, images that Dr. Chun had helped me set up earlier. The first image was a screenshot of text messages between Roman and Vanessa, their cruel words blown up large enough for everyone to read. The chapel erupted in shocked gasps and angry murmurs as people read Roman's message, saying he wished Elena would just die already so they could be together. "But wait," I said, advancing to the next image. "It gets better. Here we have emails to inheritance lawyers where Roman was researching how quickly he could access Elena's $300 million fortune after her death. And here, I showed another screenshot, are his research into fake identities and offshore accounts. He was planning to take the money and disappear, leaving behind everyone who ever trusted him." Roman's face had gone from pale to red, anger and fear mixing into something ugly. "This is slander," he shouted. "You're making this up. Where did you even get those messages?" "From Elena," I said calmly. "She'd been monitoring your phone and computer for months, Roman. She knew everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every moment you spent hoping she would die. She documented all of it because she wanted the truth to come out." I advanced to the next image, and this one made several people in the crowd gasp out loud. It was surveillance footage from the Ritz-Carlton the previous night, showing Roman and Vanessa toasting with champagne and smiling. I played a brief audio clip of their conversation, Roman's voice clear as he talked about getting $300 million and being free to do whatever they wanted. The chapel exploded into chaos. People were shouting, demanding explanations, several guests standing up as if they wanted to physically confront Roman. Elena's father broke free from the people holding him back and lunged toward Roman, who stumbled backward into a pew. My men stepped forward, creating a barrier that kept order while I continued speaking. "But here's the thing, Mr. Hale," I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Elena asked me to tell you something important. Something that I think you'll find very interesting." The crowd quieted, everyone desperate to hear what came next. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel right now because what I'm about to reveal is the twist that no one saw coming, not even the people who were there in person. I paused for dramatic effect, letting the tension build until it was almost unbearable. Then I looked directly at Roman and smiled. "She asked me to tell you that she's not dead." The silence that followed was absolute and stunning. You could have heard a pin drop in that chapel. Roman stared at me, his face going through a series of expressions, confusion to disbelief to the first dawning horror. "That's impossible," he whispered. "I saw the death certificate. The doctors confirmed it." "The doctors, you mean the ones Elena paid to create false records?" I gestured toward the back of the chapel where Dr. Chun had just entered, standing as a witness to the truth. "Or did you mean the hospital staff who helped Elena fake her death, so she could expose exactly what kind of man you are?" As I spoke, the chapel doors opened one more time, and Elena Hale walked in. The effect of Elena's entrance was like a bomb detonating in slow motion. She stood in the doorway dressed in white, a deliberate contrast to the black that everyone else wore, backlit by the afternoon sun streaming through the open doors in a way that made her look almost ethereal. For several long seconds, no one moved. No one even breathed. They just stared at the woman who was supposed to be in the casket at the front of the chapel, the woman whose funeral they were attending, standing there very much alive and very clearly not a ghost. Then someone screamed. I think it was one of Elena's cousins, a high-pitched sound of shock that broke the spell. Suddenly everyone was on their feet, voices rising in a chaotic mix of confusion and astonishment and demands for explanation. Elena's mother collapsed back into the pew, one hand pressed to her chest as if her heart might give out from the shock. Elena's father was frozen, staring at his daughter like he couldn't process what his eyes were telling him. But Elena didn't look at any of them. She walked down that center aisle with her head held high, her phone held up and clearly recording everything, and her eyes locked on Roman with an expression of pure steel. Each step was deliberate, confident, the walk of a woman who had taken complete control of her own story and wasn't afraid anymore of anything or anyone. Roman's face had gone completely white, all the blood draining away as the full implications of what was happening crashed over him like a tidal wave. "You're dead," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You're supposed to be dead. The doctors said, the death certificate. How is this possible?" Elena stopped about 10 feet away from him, close enough that everyone could hear her clearly, but far enough that she was protected by my men who had moved to flank her. "Hello, Roman," she said, her voice steady and cold. "Surprise. I'm not dead. I'm very much alive. And I've been watching everything. The affair, the stolen money, your celebration last night at the Ritz-Carlton where you and Vanessa toasted to my death. I saw all of it. I planned all of this." She turned to address the entire chapel, and I realized she was live streaming everything to social media, broadcasting this moment to potentially millions of people beyond just those present. "For months I knew my husband was hoping I would die," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I knew he was stealing from our accounts. I knew he was planning to take everything and run away with his mistress. So I did something that seemed impossible. I faked my own death to expose the truth about who Roman Hale really is and what he was willing to do for money." The chapel was completely silent now except for some people crying and the sound of phones recording from every angle. Elena was the center of attention, commanding the room with a kind of presence that comes from absolute moral certainty. Every cruel thing he said about me, every message hoping I would die, every plan to steal from our daughter's trust fund, it's all documented. It's all evidence. And it's now public record. Roman tried to speak, stammering something about misunderstandings and being able to explain, but Elena cut him off with a gesture. "You wished I would just die already," she quoted his own message back to him. "You celebrated the night before my funeral. You brought your mistress to what you thought was my actual funeral and smiled. There's nothing to explain, Roman. You showed everyone exactly who you are." Vanessa, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly tried to run. She made it about 3 steps before 2 police officers who'd been waiting outside the chapel entered and blocked her path. Both she and Roman were about to face serious legal consequences, something I'd arranged with a prosecutor friend who was very interested in the evidence of fraud and financial crimes we'd compiled. Elena walked past Roman without another glance and went straight to her parents. Her mother was sobbing, reaching out with shaking hands, and Elena embraced her tightly. "I'm sorry, Mom," Elena said softly, though her words were picked up by nearby phones and cameras. "I'm so sorry I had to put you through this. But I needed everyone to see the truth. I needed proof that couldn't be denied." Her father wrapped his arms around both of them, and for a moment the reunion was private and genuine amid all the public spectacle. Then Elena turned and walked toward me. The crowd watched as she moved to my side, and I took her hand in mine, a public declaration that we were together in this and in everything that came next. "This man," Elena said, gesturing to me, "is Kong Min Jae. Years ago I saved his life, and when I needed help exposing the truth about my husband, he gave me everything I needed to fight back. He helped me plan this, helped me protect my daughter, and showed me what real loyalty and real love actually look like. Everything you think you know about him, about me, about what's happened here today, understand this. We did what was necessary to expose a man who married me for money and hoped I would die so he could inherit everything. The police moved forward to take Roman and Vanessa into custody. Roman was still stammering protests, trying to claim this was all some misunderstanding, but the evidence was overwhelming and public. He'd been caught on camera and in messages doing exactly what Elena accused him of. There was no defense, no explanation that could make this better. His reputation was destroyed in front of 300 witnesses, and however many thousands or millions were watching the live stream. As they led him away in handcuffs, Roman looked back at Elena with an expression that mixed hatred and disbelief. "You did this," he said. "You destroyed everything." Elena smiled, and it was the kind of smile that could cut glass. "No, Roman. You destroyed everything when you decided my life was worth less than my money. I just made sure everyone knew the truth. I hope you enjoy the consequences of your choices." Watching him being escorted out of the chapel, facing arrest for fraud and attempted exploitation of his daughter's trust fund, Elena felt something shift inside her. Not revenge, though that was certainly part of it. But more than that, she felt free for the first time in years. Free from the lies, free from the fear, free from a marriage that had been poisoning her slowly. And standing beside me, with our daughter sleeping safely in a secure location and a future stretching out before us full of possibilities, she felt something else too. Hope. Real, genuine hope that her life could finally become what she'd always deserved. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so now, because the final chapter of this story, where Elena and I build our future together, is something you won't want to miss. Justice has been served, but the real happy ending is still to come. The funeral that was meant to be Elena's tragedy became instead the beginning of her triumph. 6 months passed between that explosive funeral and the day Elena and I stood in a garden preparing to exchange vows, and those months were filled with a kind of transformation that only comes from burning down everything false and rebuilding from the foundation up. Roman's world collapsed within days of the funeral revelation. The video evidence, the text messages, the financial records, all of it was handed over to prosecutors who filed charges for fraud, attempted exploitation of a minor's trust fund, and several other financial crimes. His arrest and the details of his crimes became international news, the kind of scandal that people discussed at dinner parties and analyzed on legal commentary shows. The man who'd thought he was so clever, so untouchable, became a cautionary tale about greed and arrogance. He was eventually sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay back every dollar he'd stolen, plus penalties that would leave him financially ruined for the rest of his life. Vanessa faced her own consequences. Several of Elena's family members filed civil suits against her for conspiracy and emotional distress, seeking damages that would ensure she never profited from her role in the scheme. Her career imploded as companies distanced themselves from the woman who'd celebrated a pregnant woman's supposed death. She fled the city but couldn't escape the internet, which never forgets and never forgives that kind of cruelty. Last I heard, she was working retail somewhere under an assumed name, her dreams of luxury and diamonds reduced to minimum wage and anonymity. But this story isn't really about their destruction, satisfying as that was to witness. It's about what Elena built after tearing down the lies. The divorce was finalized within 3 months, expedited because of the criminal charges and the overwhelming evidence of Roman's fraud. Elena retained full custody of Hope and complete control of her family fortune, which Roman had never actually touched despite all his planning. She threw herself into her philanthropic work with renewed purpose, using her experience to start a foundation helping women escape financially abusive marriages. She spoke publicly about her story, not for revenge but to show other women that they didn't have to accept being controlled or diminished by partners who saw them as assets rather than people. And through all of it, I was by her side, learning how to be part of someone's life in a healthy way instead of from the shadows. Elena introduced me to her family and friends, not hiding who I was or what I did, but also showing them that I was more than my reputation. Some people couldn't accept it, couldn't reconcile the image of a mafia boss with the man who clearly loved their daughter and granddaughter. But Elena's parents, after the initial shock wore off, saw how I treated their daughter with respect and genuine care, and slowly they accepted that sometimes the most unlikely people can be exactly what you need. I stepped back from some of the darker aspects of my business, focusing more on legitimate enterprises and using my connections to protect rather than intimidate. Elena never asked me to change, but loving her made me want to be better than I'd been. She saw good in me that I'd forgotten existed, and I wanted to live up to that vision. Hope grew healthy and strong, a beautiful baby girl with her mother's eyes and a spirit that seemed determined to experience every moment of life with full intensity. She had no memory of the father who'd been willing to exploit her trust fund, and Elena and I agreed that we'd tell her the truth when she was old enough to understand it, but that she'd grow up surrounded by love rather than bitterness. I held that tiny girl in my arms and felt something I'd never experienced before, the overwhelming responsibility and joy of being trusted with someone so precious and vulnerable. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, on a quiet evening in the penthouse where Elena and I had first planned her fake death, I asked her to marry me. There was no dramatic public proposal, no orchestra or flash mob or any of the theatrical gestures people sometimes make. Just the two of us, Hope sleeping in the next room, and a simple question about whether she wanted to build a future together officially and permanently. She said yes without hesitation, and we both cried a little, overwhelmed by how far we'd come from that night when she'd called me desperate and scared and asking for help. Which brings us to today, 6 months after the funeral that shook society and exposed a monster masquerading as a devoted husband. The ceremony was intentionally small and private, held in the garden behind a property I owned outside the city, far from cameras and gossip and public scrutiny. We invited only 50 people, family and close friends who genuinely cared about our happiness rather than our scandal. The garden was beautiful, late summer flowers in full bloom. String lights hung between trees creating a canopy of soft light as the sun set. Elena was radiant in an elegant white gown, simple and sophisticated, her hair loose around her shoulders and a smile on her face that I'd spent 7 years dreaming about. She carried a bouquet of white roses and walked down a path lined with candles, her father on one arm and her mother hovering nearby, both of them crying happy tears this time instead of grief. Hope was there too, 8 months old and held by Elena's mother, wearing a tiny white dress and completely oblivious to the significance of the moment but present for it nonetheless. I stood at the altar in a black suit, my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the overwhelming realization that this brilliant, strong woman had chosen me. After everything she'd been through, all the betrayal and pain, she decided to trust again and build something new with a man most people would cross the street to avoid. The ceremony was simple and genuine. We'd written our own vows, and when it came time to speak, Elena's words nearly broke me. Standing before her, I felt exposed in a way that was both terrifying and freeing, like she could see every part of me and chose to love all of it anyway. "Kong," she said, her voice steady despite tears streaming down her face, "7 years ago I saved your life without knowing that someday you'd save mine in return. You helped me when I had nowhere else to turn. You showed me what real loyalty and real love look like. You never tried to change me or diminish me or make me smaller to make yourself feel bigger. You just loved me, protected me, and stood beside me while I fought for my dignity and my future. I promise to love you with that same fierce loyalty. I promise to see you for who you really are, not who the world thinks you are. I promise to build a life with you that honors both of our truths. And I promise to show our daughter every day what real love and real partnership look like so she never settles for anything less." When it was my turn to speak, I'd planned something eloquent and romantic, but standing there looking at her, all those careful words disappeared and I just spoke from the heart. "Elena," I said, my voice rougher than I intended, "I've spent most of my life believing I didn't deserve happiness, that someone like me couldn't have something as pure as real love. Then you found me bleeding in an alley and showed me kindness when I deserved nothing. You saved my life that night, but you saved my soul when you trusted me to help you fight back against someone who tried to destroy you. Watching you take control of your own story, seeing your strength and your courage, falling in love with you has been the greatest privilege of my life. I promise to protect you and Hope with everything I have. I promise to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me. And I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing to love a man like me." The officiant, a friend of Elena's family, pronounced us married, and when I kissed my wife for the first time as her husband, the small gathering erupted in applause and cheers. Elena's mother was openly sobbing, and even my hardened security team who'd helped orchestrate the funeral revenge were smiling. It was a moment of pure joy, unmarred by scandal or spectacle, just two people who'd found each other in the darkness and decided to walk toward the light together. The reception was intimate and warm, dinner under the stars with toasts that celebrated not just our marriage but the journey we'd taken to get there. Elena's father stood up and gave a speech that acknowledged how difficult it had been to accept me, but how grateful he was that I'd protected his daughter when she needed it most. My own team raised glasses to the woman who'd made their boss human again. And Elena and I danced to a song about second chances and new beginnings while Hope slept peacefully nearby, surrounded by people who would protect and love her unconditionally. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Elena and I stood in the garden alone for a moment, her head resting against my chest, my arms wrapped around her. We'd survived something that should have destroyed her, had turned it into triumph, and were now beginning something neither of us had expected to find. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't called you that night?" Elena asked quietly. "If I'd tried to handle Roman on my own or just accepted what was happening?" I tightened my arms around her. "I think you would have found another way to fight back because that's who you are. You're not someone who accepts being victimized. But I'm grateful every day that you trusted me enough to call, that you let me be part of your story. Being with you, loving you, it's given my life a meaning and purpose I didn't know was possible." She tilted her head back to look at me, and her smile was everything. "We're going to have a good life," she said. "Not perfect, because life never is, but good and real and built on truth instead of lies. And our daughter is going to grow up seeing what real love looks like, seeing that women don't have to accept less than they deserve, seeing that strength comes in many forms." I kissed her forehead and pulled her close again. "The best life," I promised. "Because you deserve nothing less than everything good this world has to offer, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." And that, ultimately, is what this story is about. Not just revenge, though that was satisfying in its own way. Not just justice, though Roman and Vanessa certainly got what they deserved. This story is about a woman who refused to be a victim, who fought back brilliantly and bravely, and who found real love with the person who saw her for who she truly was. It's about second chances and new beginnings and the courage it takes to tear down everything false in your life so you can build something true. Elena and I went on to build a family, to use our combined resources and connections to help other people trapped in abusive or exploitative situations, and to show our daughter that she could be both gentle and strong, both kind and fierce. We never hid the truth of how we got together or what her biological father had done, but we also never let that darkness define us. We chose light instead, chose love, chose to believe that people could change and grow and become better versions of themselves. If you're watching this and you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. Make sure you're subscribed because I have more stories like this, more tales of justice and revenge and people reclaiming their power. But more than that, I hope this story taught you something. I hope it showed you that you're never truly powerless even when it feels like you have no options. I hope it reminded you that patience and planning can be more powerful than immediate confrontation. And I hope it proved that love, real love, doesn't manipulate or control or diminish. It protects and empowers and stands beside you while you fight your own battles. Elena taught me that. She saved my life twice, once physically and once spiritually. And building a life with her and Hope has been the greatest adventure I've ever undertaken, better than anything I accomplished in my previous life of shadows and fear and violence. So here's to second chances. Here's to women who refuse to be victims. Here's to finding love in unexpected places. And here's to the courage it takes to burn down your life when it's built on lies and rebuild it into something true and beautiful and worth fighting for. Elena and I are living proof that your story doesn't end when someone tries to destroy you. Sometimes that's just the beginning of the best chapter you'll ever write. This story teaches us something fundamental about human nature and the choices we make when faced with betrayal. Elena could have accepted her situation, could have confronted Roman directly and hoped for the best, or could have simply walked away quietly. Instead, she chose a fourth path that required incredible courage and strategic thinking. What makes her story powerful isn't just the revenge, satisfying as that was. It's the decision to take complete control of her own narrative instead of remaining a victim of someone else's cruelty. She recognized that sometimes the truth needs to be undeniable, that exposing someone's true nature requires more than just words or private confrontations. It requires evidence and witnesses and a willingness to do something extraordinary. This story also reminds us that love comes in unexpected forms and that the people who truly care about us are revealed not in the easy moments, but in the moments when we need help the most. Kang's love for Elena wasn't performative or transactional like Roman's false affection. It was steady, protective, and focused on her well-being rather than what he could gain from her. If there's one lesson to carry forward from Elena's story, it's this: you are never truly powerless even when someone tries to make you feel that way. With courage, planning, and the right allies, you can reclaim your life and expose the truth. And sometimes, in the process of fighting back, you discover strengths you didn't know you had and find love in places you never expected to look. The question isn't whether you'll face betrayal or cruelty in your life. Most of us will at some point. The question is how you'll respond when that moment comes. Will you accept it, or will you fight back with everything you have? Elena chose to fight, and in doing so, she didn't just get revenge. She got her life back. She got justice. And she found real love with someone who truly valued her. That's the kind of ending worth fighting for.